Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's online forum. COVID-19 has greatly impacted many facets of the global travel and tourism industry. Today's online forum will provide a regional snapshot of the US, Europe, Canada, and China, and is co-organized by TTRA and Temple University's US Asia Center for Tourism and Hospitality Research. The US Asia Center for Tourism and Hospitality Research is committed to conduct translational research that links different disciplines, connects academics and practitioners, and builds bridges between the East and West. Today's online forum consists of panelists' presentations and a follow-up Q&A session. Just as a reminder, all attendees, please stay muted and are welcome to ask questions using the chat box function. Your questions will be relayed to our panelists during the Q&A session. Let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Laura Wu. I'm an assistant professor from the Department of Tourism and Hospitality Management, Temple University. I will be a moderator for today's forum. Together with me here are our four renowned international tourism experts, and they are Mr. Michel Dubreuil. Michel is the Manager of Research at Destination Canada in Vancouver. Michel oversees the Economic and Tourism Statistics Program and leads market research and partnership development initiatives with provincial and territorial marketing organizations. Michel is a past president of the TTRA Canada. Our second panelist is Mr. Olivier Henry Billboard. Olivier is the CEO of TCI Research, which he founded in 2010 as a way to combine its knowledge in data and analytics with a solid passion for travel. His travel BI company, TCI, works for over 100 destinations, travel brands, and organizations globally with a mission to fuel destination success and rebound through data, setting innovative international standards for monitoring visitor satisfaction, resident sentiment, and destination brand reputation. Olivier was awarded by UNWTO in 2011 for its reference data solution, TravelSat, that offers visitor economy players with insights using smart combination of surveys and social data analytics. In 2017, he received the Best Travel Market Research CEO Award from the EU Business News. Our third panelist is Mr. David Huether. David is Deputy Director of Research at the National Travel and Tourism Office within the International Trade Administration at the U.S. Department of Commerce. He rejoined Commerce Department in March 2020. Previously, David was the Senior Vice President for Research at the U.S. Travel Association from 2011 to 2020. For the prior 13 years, David was Chief Economist at the National Association of Manufacturers. Dave began his career in the 1990s at the Bureau of Economic Analysis at the U.S. Department of Commerce. Dave holds a master's degree in economics from the George Washington University. Our last panelist is Dr. Xiang Robert Li. Robert is a professor and director of the U.S. Asia Center for Tourism and Hospitality Research, Temple University. Robert has published extensively on destination marketing and tourist behavior, and worked with numerous prestigious organizations, including the World Travel and Tourism Council, U.S. Department of Commerce, Destination Canada, and Disney. Robert is currently a TTRA board member. With the introduction down, now we're going to switch the stage over to our very first panelist, Mr. Michel. So Michel, could you please start sharing your screen and then to share your insights and updates about the impact in the tourism economy of Canada. Thank you, Michel. Michel, can you unmute yourself?
here we go. Technology challenge a bit. Let me, so just need to make sure that I have what I need. Sorry about that. It's trying to get the technology working here, but okay, I think we are back in. Good, excellent. So you, do you see my screen at the moment? No.
Yes. Oh,
Okay. No, now you don't, but now you do. Perfect. Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much, Lori, for the introduction. And yes?
Michelle, I don't think I'm seeing the slides. Can you read?
Yeah, let's see, share screen. And share this. And we go over here.
And for the attendees that just logged in, welcome again. Thank you for coming in today. Please stay muted. Welcome, Michelle, again. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Can't wait to hear about your
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for your patience there. Just the time it took me just to get back on track on the screen function. So you should see beautiful Cape Breton in front of you. Thank you for the invitation to talk about a little bit of situation in Canada here with respect to COVID-19. First thing I wanted to start with was this chart. We've truly entered globally uncharted waters, and what you're seeing in front of you is something that was published by the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, called the World Pandemic Uncertainty Index, and what shows for 143 countries an index of uncertainties, coronavirus compared to past similar events, in particular SARS. And you can see that what we're facing right now is truly dwarf absolutely anything else that we've seen before. And in fact, it would also dwarf some of the economic crisis that we went through in 2008, 2009. We're really uncharted water, and this is creating a tremendous amount of social and economic uncertainties that few of us have encountered before. I think that the SARS experience taught us in the past that one of the most important actions that we can take or undertake to confront such situation and deal with uncertainty is to come together. So we're all in this together, first of all, and to maintain clear and factual information. So at Destination Canada, this is one of the things that we've endeavored to do, is to communicate with our partners, communicate with partners from all provinces and DMOs, and share information with them. COVID, it doesn't seem that long ago that we watch events dramatically and decisively unfold in Wuhan, China, and then eventually in other places like Italy. We saw the effect of the slowdown in arrivals from China just as the lunar Chinese New Year's was starting. At that time, I made a presentation, or soon after that, to our Minister of Tourism in early March, describing the potential impact on Canadian tourism of COVID-19 before the World Health Organization declared a global health pandemic, and Canada first closed its borders to air arrival from abroad on March 18th. And then Canada and the US came to an agreement on closing our land port as well to all non-essential travel on March 21st. But at that time, worldwide, there was over 400,000 cases that have been reported in 170 countries. So we're far away from that. But the immediate impact of border closures was felt first on, of course, on air travel, where you can see here that was sudden and it was immediate. The air arrival of U.S. residents to Canada quickly felt within days after the World Health Organization declared a global pandemic, and collapsed to near zero soon after the March 18 air closure. Similar fluctuations, or following a series of fluctuations and volatilities in arrival from Northeast China, which is what you have on the graph on the right side of your screen. You see that it increases in January and kind of collapse after that before rebounding. That was the impact that we saw from China at that time. And then, of course, once we closed our border, the same thing happened. The air arrival from overseas collapsed to near zero and it's still at that level at the moment. On the landward side, the same pattern, United States to Canada, and likewise from Canada, of Canadians returning from the United States, which before March 11 would hover between 15,000 to 40,000 arrivals per day. Now it's just a mere trickle. So the COVID-19 global pandemic is first and foremost a global health emergency. The global travel was identified as a primary vector of COVID-19 dispersion, which triggered border closure, thus shutting down international tourism to Canada and globally. But community level transmission was also identified as a major secondary threat, which led to the imposition of health emergency measures to contain the outbreak and prevent further spread, which had a direct impact on domestic travel and more broadly brought the economy to a dramatic slowdown. I've heard an expression quite interesting actually from Paul Krugman, a Nobel laureate, an American economist, Nobel laureate of economics in 2008, that described the situation as the economy being essentially put into a medically induced coma, and so as to gain control over the spread of the COVID-19 virus. So that's kind of an interesting analogy. And now, of course, we're trying to emerge from that from that situation. I think I've lost my thing there. Sorry. Yes. So at Destination Canada, we work with tourism economics to starting in March to develop an economic impact model related to COVID-19 outbreak on the Canadian tourism sector. And based on their assessment, the Canadian economy is expected to contract anywhere between 6.5%, and their baseline scenario, in which the COVID-19 virus is contained, to almost 12% should the virus not be contained that this year. By any stretch of measures, these are staggering numbers. And the contained scenarios, we would see a return to the 2019 level by the end of Q3 2021. In a non-contained scenario, the GDP would return to the 2019 level sometimes in 2023. So their baseline scenario assumes that the pandemic fades in the second half of 2020, and that containment effort can gradually unwind as economic activity normalizes in 2021, helped by policy supports which have been deployed by the government of Canada to support small and medium enterprises and wage of workers. So their baseline scenario is consistent with what has been published by both the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and the Bank of Canada for 2020. So the impact of combination of both the pandemic and the outbreak will have a pervasive and impact on the and widespread impact actually on tourism. When we look first at profound impact, it's already having its impact on throughout the tourism industry. This is best illustrated by what's happening in the Canadian accommodation sector, where occupancy rate have fallen by an average of 62% in April 2019 to 13 or close to a little below 14% in April 2020. With an average daily rate that has contracted by 30%, the RevPAR declined from $94 last year to about $14 this year, which represents an estimated $841 million loss for the Canadian accommodation sector in April alone. That is absolutely massive. In a recent webinar, STR estimated that the average break-even occupancy rate would be somewhere around 45 to 55%, which by my estimation would represent an average of $75 RevPAR for the industry. So we're well below that threshold. And this is, of course, leading to room and hotel closures in the midst of the pandemic. You could tell a similar story about the airline sector, but that will be for another time. The pandemic and recession combinations are also having a very pervasive impact on all regions of Canada and on all travel segments. As you can see in this chart here on the left side, the impact is widespread across Canada and has touched all provinces and of course territories. And this goes from a low occupancy rate of about 7.2% in Quebec to a high of 17.5% in British Columbia, which is higher than anywhere else, but it's still very low. When we look at different segments, a good approximation, let's say, of the business meeting and business event is to look at what's happening in downtown core, the three major cities, Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal. And those have been particularly hard hit by the present situation, where the occupancy rate in Montreal stands at or stood at in April at 3.1%, and in Toronto at 3.5%, and Vancouver at 4.7%. So truly unbelievably low numbers. In areas where we have more of a mix of leisure and business travels, such as Banff, Niagara, and Quebec City, these also are facing very, very low occupancy rates. And when we look at the business event, one of the things, business event is facing a lot of cancellation, particularly over the peak business event period of April to June. It's a very important period for Canada in that field. The charts that you have in front of you comes from our National PACE Business Event Report that we've developed in collaboration with our destinations and convention bureaus across Canada. So the industry was facing actually a very good year before the outbreak itself. For cancellation of events primarily between March and May. The gray columns represent what we had before the COVID. The color columns represent the situation at the moment. On the black are still in the book, even though right now we're into May and we know that those events have been canceled, so that we have to assume have been canceled. The red one, which includes some in June, our peak period, are at risk of being of cancellations. And whereas now I think the event planners are still hoping holding hope that the fall events will take place, and we'll hope that it will do. So the pandemic and recession combination is also having a persistent impact, meaning that it will take time before tourism revenue returns to 2019 level, which was estimated at about $105 billion Canadian in 2019. But however, travel recovery will depend on how soon the COVID-19 can be contained and on the depth of the economic downturn that's going to be generated by it, including its impact on discretionary income, on bankruptcy and our supply capacity, as well as the recovery of international air travel. So in baseline scenario where COVID is contained, tourism revenue is expected to surpass the 2019 level by early 2022, and then the downside that might not occur until late 2023 or even 2024. So what does that mean for the recovery of tourism in Canada? What we know and has been agreed at a ministerial meeting of the G20 is that it will start with domestic tourism, which will eventually be followed gradually by a return of international tourism. In Canada, we're fortunate in that Canadians love traveling outbound. So there's a huge potential of converting outbound propensity toward domestic travel. I think Canada is the sixth or seventh largest spender in outbound tourism in the world. So that's an opportunity for us to convert that and help our industry. But resumption of travel, of course, will be contingent on reaching a manageable level of COVID-19 containment in order to monitor and prevent its spread, and of course, protect the health and safety of Canadians. So far, we've managed to stabilize a number of new cases, but the risk to Canadians is still evolving and is considered high. The risk, of course, also varies between and within regions of Canada, between the different provinces, and within communities within those provinces. While the situation is under control in most provinces in Canada and territories, Quebec, Ontario, and to a lesser degree on Alberta are working on containing the spread further at the moment. So recovery will depend first on how well we in Canada work together to contain and neutralize the spread of COVID-19, and second, how countries eventually can work together to reopen borders and international travel. At Destination Canada, in collaboration with other government agencies, particularly Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada, and as well with Tourism Industry Association of Canada, we're actively working on a number of initiatives, many of which are research-based. First, to support the Government of Canada's response in this unprecedented crisis, and two, to support and guide the industry through an eventual recovery. So, for instance, we've worked with McKinsey Consulting to develop a framework to determine the type of support that tourism businesses would need to continue to operate, and would speed up also the recovery when that time comes. This framework helped inform the economic package policies, such as wage subsidies for SMEs, designed to keep employees on the payroll, along with a series of other economic initiatives to keep business afloat and facilitate the recovery process. So to assist the industry and our PMO, provincial tourism management organization, at provincial level, the territorial level, and the destination level, we've developed a recovery signal framework. One of the issues that we can see in the marketplace right now is that there's all kinds of different signals that are published and repeated in the media on when travel is going to be returning, by whom, by what mode. And there's all kinds of different headlines, but this is also very conflicting, and it's difficult to make sense of all those opinions together. So the recovery signals that we've been working on is allowing us to monitor the strongest and most feasible measures that will provide us with a consistent set of early indicators that travel are interested in traveling again, and then we can start re-engaging in our activities. So the distance and the length of time that people are willing and able to travel is assumed to shift as public health restrictions are lifted. And of course, right now, we're simply in the mode of COVID response. But as things evolve, then we expect that people will start traveling locally, which we call hyper-local to local. So that's going to be involving a series of day trips that are relatively close to home. People will start traveling regionally within their own provinces, overnight trips, staying at hotels, friends and relatives, go camping. Then that, once we have that on containment, there might be some bubbles or between provinces or different regions of the countries that will allow us to have some interprovincial travel and close maybe to the next province and eventually across different provinces. That will eventually move to some tentative international travel before we actually get back to a regular international travel framework. Of course, it's trying to figure out what's going to happen now is actually fairly complex. There's different perspectives that we need to look at. What's happening on the traveler's side? When are they going to be really ready to travel? What will be their expectations in terms of what their needs will be? What kind of needs will have to be met for them to re-engage in travel? Will communities be ready to welcome travelers? What kind of restrictions and welcoming method will they be unfolding? And of course, there is tourism sector itself. What's happening there in terms of employment, staffing, health emergency, marketing, access, and products. So these are all kind of priorities that we're seeing across the country. And we have undertaken a series of research initiatives to try to address some of those or all of those issues, including economic impact, understanding economic motivations and travel intent, and of course also looking at resident sentiment. Where are these stand right now in relation to the current situation? So that's my presentation. I think it took maybe a little more time than I should have, but that come full circles. I started out with the World Economic Uncertainty Index, which is a reflection of consumer and business confidence. And what we've learned is that communication is extremely important. Sharing information is extremely important. And that's what we've done both in by exerting some leadership on the research front across with Canada, bringing everybody together from provinces and territories to discuss our priorities, what's happening also at the senior management level. And even our Minister, Mélanie Joly, also held a town hall yesterday to discuss what was happening on the Government of Canada side. And so there's an unprecedented level of collaboration taking place. And a lot of what I've presented is actually available also on our website. We're publishing a lot of different research that you can find there, including the McKinsey report and some of the market signals I just discussed, and where also are different countries in terms of the recovery process. So I'll leave it at that, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Michel, for such a comprehensive overview and updates of what's going on in Canada. And now we're going to switch ears and then turn to Olivier for him to present to us what's going on in Europe. Thank you, Olivier.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. Welcome to Europe. I'm going to start with the key facts and figures about the conditions here in Europe, starting with a very ugly map, which is actually available on European Commission website, which is trying to visualize the travel restrictions throughout Europe. And just in a nutshell, it's a big mess. I think as we speak today, nobody in Europe is able to understand anything about where you can travel, if you can pass the border in Schengen, outside Schengen, it's clear, but within and across Europe, still today, I have no idea if I can reach my home country in France from Brussels, in what conditions and whatsoever. So there are very strict restrictions in place, but they are changing every day. So it means there are a couple of attractions and destinations right now who are communicating about possible reopening, but from the traveler's prospect, it's just impossible to plan. So at the end of the day, there is less than 15 days of visibility for travelers to plan their trip to Europe and even in their own destinations. So that's a really big mess. It's one of the beauty of Europe, I think, compared to some other regions. It's really not harmonized. In terms of hard fact, if I look at the UNWTO latest report about international tourism and arrivals impact year to date, in Europe, it's kind of a -20 or -19 compared to last year, same period. So it's one of the regions of the world which is obviously impacted mostly after Asia and the Pacific. And there's growing concerns probably about particularly the big names like Spain, Croatia, some of the southern Mediterranean European destinations. But this can really change according to the travel conditions, because still today in Europe, the whole market is not driven by the demand, it's really driven by the supply and possibilities to travel. So the way destinations here in Europe are coping with the problem in this big mess occurring right now are in two directions. In terms of destination marketing response, of course, everybody is looking at the local and domestic, and they're right, because it's a nice way to restart and giving a bit of money in restaurants and some of the hotels are still opening. But it's actually not really a demand, it's just a forced demand. Nothing is showing that, this is a long-term trend. People are basically traveling where they can. Of course, many GMOs have kept the link with virtual reality and providing nice kind of campaigns. You have examples on the right from Monaco, from Antwerp, which has just provided a great video for keeping the link and emotion and so on. A lot of corporate campaigns, but also Greece actually was the one started in Europe with an amazing campaign on social media. And what they do as well is really amplifying all the ambassadors. Some are paying for that, but many are just realizing that there are big numbers of fans all over the world of destinations who are just there for making the job free of charge. And so they are trying to amplify and voicing ambassadors so they keep the link. So it's all about sharing souvenirs, it's all about virtual reality and so on. Of course, there's a big game around database targeted branding for restoring the attractiveness and understanding who's been mostly exposed to bad stories about the destination and so on. I will come back on that later. And there's one first example of a destination, which is, we cannot pronounce the name, by the way. It's an Austrian ski resort, which has been so badly hit in terms of reputation that they have decided right now to change completely their positioning. So it's used to be the Ibiza, very festive ski resort, and they have decided to stop because they've been portrayed as a destination spreading the virus all over Europe. Then it's probably the most important aspect we see is destinations managing, of course, the problem in terms of really management and operational, being ready when visitors are going to come back. So crisis management, a lot of CEO updates and everything, which is to me much more kind of a US or North American culture. And here in Europe, many CEOs were just had no idea and no clue how to deal with that. So there's been a lot of crisis management issues, data sharing, keeping the link with stakeholders and webinars. Many aspects related to how to guide the private sector to find the public funding, just to make sure that they are going to survive as much as they can. A lot of reflections around sanitary labels, sanitary certifications, what to adapt about what existing already, or do they need, like in Portugal, they have developed a new sanitary labels, so to reinsure future visitors. A lot of co-ops with DMOs, between national DMOs, local DMOs, and DMOs and verticals. And also many conversations around insurances, tourism product terms and conditions. And we see, of course, like everywhere, a lot of lobbying from DMOs to governments and officials to push a bit reopening as soon as possible to preserve employment and activities. So I would like to now share a couple of more, let's say, qualitative insights about the sentiment. Just because when people are asking us where are going people to go and when and who, it's just impossible to make any forecast right now. I mean, the only thing we can say without any data is just people are going to go first in Europe where they can go. Of course, domestically, but where else? I mean, they cannot travel everywhere else. So then by the end of the year, probably they will travel where they can afford, because we have a little economic crisis going on, as you know, and when they have to go. So visit friends and relatives and a bit of individual business. And then only from 2021, probably, hopefully, they will go where they want to go. And this is exactly at that moment where we will have a mix of visitors who had to cancel destination, so rescheduling them, but it's still a very tiny fragment of those who have been impacted in Europe. We are running a couple of surveys there, and 1 in 2 Europeans has to cancel because of COVID-19. But the share of those who have already rebooked for in the future is just very limited. So all the cards are reshuffled. And this is where the sentiment and the reputation of destinations is very important. So looking at that, and all the data I'm going to show you come from one of the modules we have developed for working along with DMOs to accompany and measure the rebound of the destination from visitation point of view with the Uber Media and TravelSat data, from the sentiment and from the planning prospect. So they're looking at the sentiment at large. So everything which is shared on social networks by officials, journalists, consumers, citizens, brands, and companies. Since the beginning of the year, so when the crisis started, there's been not less than 1.4 billion now, or 3, COVID-19 related travel social conversations. And still today in Europe, 1 in 3 travel related conversations about Europe is mentioning COVID-19. So it's a mix of a lot of negative stories, mostly, of course, about, you know, destinations portrayed as epicenters of the virus, stories about tourist traps in hotels, in cruise, in airports, destinations which have been mentioned are just unable to manage the problems in the proper way, holiday dreams converted into nightmares, a lot of refund issues, travel insurances, illegal bookings, and, you know, all the awful narratives around the fact that Venice has never been so beautiful since there is no tourist. Paris is fantastic since there is no tourist. All these stories that are very bad for the sector. So now the good news is we are entering since the beginning of April into a new phase and a shift in the sentiment. Whereas people are still, of course, worrying, and there's a lot of concerns shared about travel and tourism, but still now there's a growing number of narratives and conversations around sharing souvenirs, about starting planning, about the next travel, a lot of virtual reality, a lot of great stories for local heroes, a lot of operational measures now in the cruise industry, pushed by DMOs. And this is currently trying already to reinsure potential visitors. And so the whole sector globally has already recovered about a half of the net sentiment, which is measuring the polarity between positive and negative conversations. Looking at specific regions in the world, Europe has been hit, of course, like all the destinations. Nobody is, I'd say, fortunately recording the very low level that China is recording in terms of reputation, but Europe has been hit later than all the continents, but not less. And so now, as you can see, we are now starting the rebound, but it's still very fragile. And together, Europe, Canada, US are now positive again, but it's still not the kind of level they should have. When we look at the sentiments of the stories and all the narratives about Europe from various parts of the world, we see that, and that's just a confirmation that domestic tourism and regional tourism is going to start first. But the reputation of Europe as a destination among Europeans has started rebounding way faster and better. Asia is actually also now sharing more positive content, social content about Europe. The thing is, from the US, what we get from the data is that it seems the US have been particularly exposed with negative stories about Europe. So it may take a bit more time for US travelers to consider Europe again. And there will be some survey-based data shared soon by European Travel Commission from a survey we do for them about long-haul travel sentiment index, confirming that maybe the US will wait a bit before coming back in Europe soon. In terms of sub-destinations in Europe, and not everybody has been impacted the same way. So the reputation of Greece, for example, has been relatively spared throughout the crisis. They have been hit like anybody, just like the day Trump decided to close the frontier, then there's been really a huge hit for all over Europe, but Greece less than other destinations like Spain or Italy. So everybody is rebounding, but what we see is that a destination like Greece or Portugal are kind of more potentially on the list of potential travelers because their reputation has been better. And just by chance, Greece have just announced they are going to reopen in the summer, whereas for Spain, there are still rumors they will be closed to all international visitors until the end of November. It's just a rumor, it's not a fact, but there are many rumors. And when we look and deep dive into the type of niches or segments, nothing has been spared. There's been a lot of negative stories about cruise, about rural destinations, urban destinations, and also a lot of ski resorts. A country like Austria, particularly Innsbruck or Tyrol, or that particular ski resort, Ischl, has been dramatically impacted. So it means that Tyrol is going to probably, it's going to be longer for them to restore completely their brand reputation and attractiveness when it comes to think about the next skiing season in 2021. And starting towards now, approaching the end of my presentation, what we see as well is there's a lot of discrepancy according to the verticals. So whereas still today, anything related to transportation, so public transportations, airports, airlines, still are suffering a lot about a bad reputation today, simply because this is where people consider the risk is the highest. Whereas if you look at the curve for cultural attractions, for theme parks, very quickly the rebound has been there. So what it means, it's also because they've been the first to convert their experience online, like visiting the Louvre through virtual reality and all this stuff. But it also means now that the sentiment is restored for specific tourism attractions more than for destinations. And if I take two examples of iconic destinations in Europe, looking at the net sentiments, so reflecting the reputation, it's way easier today to sell or to imagine as a traveler to visit the Eiffel Tower in Paris than to visit Paris. It's easier to project and to dream about food in Rome than visiting Rome. So it means that for destinations, it's quite important beyond the, let's say, corporate communication about the destination at large. It's very important to co-op with the specific iconic sub-destinations and iconic attractions, because those reputation for those attractions have been really restored very quickly. And people are happy to dream and start planning for those particular iconic attractions more than for the destination at large. Because simply when you think about a destination, you also have all the negative stories about politics and societal and logistics and everything which is not necessarily positive. So as just as a conclusion, and I will not go through the 13 key drivers that we've been analyzing so far throughout the sentiment analysis, but there are maybe 3 that are to us quite important to consider globally, but especially in Europe. The first, and it was mentioned by Michel, but the resident tourism phobia, it's possible it's going to increase in the coming months. We have heard a lot of negative stories about discriminations and especially in Europe from Asia, but also in the US from Europeans. People are going to see now visitors and international visitors are potential risk of contaminations. And also residents who have lost their jobs, if they see the city spending a lot of money for welcoming visitors, they will also push back. And there's a risk of tourism phobia growing in those particular destinations. Then in terms of management and destination management, it's absolutely important to focus on all contact points with the destination from the day one at airport, transit, the cruise airlines, public transportations. No communication can reassure about that. It will be a matter of the experience of first post COVID-19 reviews and how they feel about the tangible safety feeling when they're at destinations. And one aspect we heard from social listening is about the central role expected from the frontline travel and tourism staff. And again, those acting in info centers, all the tourist guides, receptionists, they will be the one first in contact with the new visitors tomorrow, and they will be the one spreading a good confidence and possibly creating the reputation of a destination way more and way better probably than any campaign. So those are to be very in a central central focus on any recovery destination management plan. It's just to say again that the shift towards DMO to DMMO has been particularly put in conversations right now. So it's clear expectations. That's it for me. If there are any questions, happy to take them after, or you can contact us afterwards if you want, or our partner in the US, Canada, based in Toronto, so Rove Marketing.
Thank you very much, Olivia, for your very informative presentation. Our next panelist, David Huther, will be presenting some updates on what is going on here in the States.
Great, thanks, Laurie, and thanks for driving my slides. I appreciate it a great deal. So when you can bring the first one up, that's super. Great. So as we all know, that since the World Health Organization determined that the rapidly spreading outbreak in China constituted a public health emergency of international concern, there's been a drastic change related to international inbound travel to the United States. As we all know, in early February, the State Department put an advisory out related to China travel to the United States. And soon after, in early February, the United States Airlines suspended all flights from the United States to and from China. Soon thereafter, travel restrictions were expanded between the United States and Iran, South Korea, and Italy. A little later in March, around a little before mid-March, those restrictions were extended to Europe, and then eventually to include Ireland and the UK. Around mid-March, the U.S. Department of State advised all U.S. citizens to avoid all international travel due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And as was mentioned earlier, the United States, Mexico, and Canada announced mutual agreements to restrict non-essential travel between three nations. The National Travel and Tourism Office, which is part of the International Trade Administration within the U.S. Department of Commerce, is in charge of estimating international inbound travel to and from the United States, which is then there for an input into our balance payments accounts. So what I'd like to do is show you what's been going on related to international travel to the United States over the last couple of months. So next slide, if you can. So what we're looking here is at year-over-year change related to total, that is international visitation to the United States from Canada, Mexico, and overseas through February, and then the overseas visitation that extends into March. And we found out in the early months of the year, in January and February, visitation to the United States from Canada was growing at a fairly good clip, up about 4% in January and up nearly 9% in February. In Mexico, visitation was essentially flat for the first couple of months of the year. And then overseas visitation, which was down maybe about 1.5% or so in January, started to fall off more significantly in February, where overseas visitation to the United States fell on a year-over-year basis by nearly 7%. And that was due partially to an 84% decline in Chinese visitation to the United States. But outside of China, other visitation from overseas fell by 5.4% in February. If we then go forward to March, Mexico visitation actually fell by about 30% in March. And visitation from overseas countries on a year-over-year basis, as you can see, fell by nearly 70% in the third month this year. To put that in perspective, the 69% drop in overseas visitation in March compares to about a 46% drop in October 2001, which was the deepest year-over-year 12-month decline during the 2001-2002 period. And as an FYI, the yearly declines on a year-over-year basis extended for approximately 12 months from during the 2001 crisis. It started in September and it kind of went all the way to 2001 and extended all the way to December 2002. So if we move to the next slide to look at where the declines have been, as you see, these are the top 25 inbound markets to the United States. And you see the declines were significant everywhere. There wasn't any market where the decline was less than 50% if you exclude Chile, which was around 49% or so, but they are all very deep declines. And even though we don't have published data for visitation by country for April, we do have preliminary I-92 data, which takes a look at international airline passengers to and from the United States in April compared to April of last year. And right now, airline passengers to and from the U.S. in April of this year was down 98% compared to April of last year. So when the overseas visitation is reported, which will be later this month toward the end of May, we should see a more significant decline than we even experienced in March. So next slide, please. So how is this impacting trade? So what you're looking at here is a 12-month change in U.S. exports, that the blue line, that's total U.S. exports of goods and services, and then travel exports, which is the green. And we see in the last few months is that in January, overall exports on a year-over-year basis were up about $2 billion, not significant. Non-travel was up $2 billion. Travel exports in January of this year compared to January of last year was basically flat. If we then transfer into February this year, year-over-year exports were actually down by about $700 million. And that was due that was due mainly due to travel exports. So travel exports on a year-over-year basis in February were down by close to $2 billion, where non-travel exports were up $1 billion. So the decline we started to see in exports in general in the United States in February was due to travel, not to the rest of the economy. If we then transfer into March, we see that on a year-over-year basis, U.S. exports of goods and services fell by $23 billion. And the travel exports fell by half of that, $11.5 billion, and non-travel, that is every other type of export in the United States, fell by $11.5 billion. So total U.S. exports fell by about 11% in March compared to March 2019, where travel exports fell by 53%, which was, as you could expect, it was the largest year-over-year decline in travel exports going back several decades that we have data for. Next slide, please. So if we decompose travel exports and see what was impacted the most, keep in mind that travel exports not only include what people think of in terms of travel spending, but also includes other areas. You see that while overall travel exports fell 53%, spending by international visitors into the United States fell by 70%, which was pretty close in line with overall visitation. Passenger fares by international visitors on U.S. airlines fell by a similar 68%. And if you look at spending internationally in the United States for medical, educational, and short-term worker spending, that actually was up marginally by about 5% on a year-over-year basis. The April trade data, which I suspect will be worse, is going to be coming out on June 4th of this year. So it's important to keep in mind that. And another thing I'd like to highlight before we go over to Q&A is that the Labor Department last Friday released the April jobs report, which had about a $20 million job loss on non-payroll employment in the United States, was obviously the biggest loss on record. But to show how the travel industry and the greater leisure and hospitality industry was impacted, the number of people working in leisure and hospitality in April of this year compared to April of last year was essentially cut in half. It fell by nearly 50%, and by about a little more than 7 million jobs. And that accounted for more than a third of the overall job loss in the United States, about 37% in April this year, which kind of highlights the fact that travel-related industries, extending beyond leisure and hospitality, but including transportation and retail, are among the most significantly impacted during this developing crisis. So with that, we look forward to listening to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dave, for your presentation. And our last panelist is Dr. Robert Lee. Robert, would you like to presentation on your?
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Wu. Can you see my slide, full screen, or the preview? Okay. Thank you very much for this opportunity to talk a little bit about the latest updates from China on the COVID-19 impacts. I'm fully aware that we are kind of running out of time, so I'm going to be as quick as possible. Same as other countries, that the COVID-19 pandemic has presented tremendous challenges to China's economy across different sectors, but the most severely impacted sectors, the top four, are actually all related to tourism hospitality. They are eating out, business travel, domestic travel, and outbound travel. And by the way, I have to apologize that some of these figures that I use in this PPT from Chinese sources, so, and there are some of them that are a little bit hard to translate. But anyway, I will try to walk you through that. So basically, tourism-related sectors suffer the worst. And if you compare that to 2003 SARS outbreak, this, comparatively speaking, the tourism industry in China actually suffered even more. And no need to explain that the domestic Chinese tourism and the inbound Chinese tourism, they have both suffered tremendous loss. But based on some of the latest forecast available from the Ministry of Culture and Tourism in China, they believe that the outbound travel from China will suffer a probably 17 to 18% decline. But this is, I believe, this is very hard to predict at this point, comparing to all the other phenomena, particularly in light of all the geopolitical relationship and tensions. But we saw a similar forecast from Oxford Economics about anywhere probably 15 to 20% decline of Chinese outbound tourism, and for the U.S. it's probably 35%. But the points I want to make, there are actually 2 points that I want to make about outbound Chinese tourism. One thing is that if hypothetically all this cross-border travel can be somehow redirected into domestic travel, and then if we can conduct that analysis and compare all different countries, actually China will be a quote-unquote winner in this, because traditionally, as you know, that Chinese tourists spend a lot when they travel abroad comparing to foreign visitors traveling to China. So if hypothetically there is a possibility that all the Chinese outbound travel expenditure will stay in China during this pandemic, then actually China's GDP would gain 1.7% according to a recent analysis. Of course, this is an oversimplified analysis, but that's actually explained one thing about why the domestic tourism has got unprecedented attention from the Chinese industry and government. The other point is, according to a very recent report by World Tourism Alliance, they actually predicted the what they call prosperity index of different regions in terms of receiving Chinese outbound tourism. And in the first and second quarter, what you can see is actually that North America got the hardest hit. And comparatively speaking, actually, Eastern Asia will do a little bit better than that. So these are basically kind of an overall snapshot of what China has experienced. Let's just focus on the recovery pattern, because I believe that because China is a little bit ahead of the curve, some of the experiences, some of the things that the Chinese market went through may have some, may probably bode, actually send some signals to the other markets. First of all, this is a picture taken on April the 4th, the Qingming Festival in China. This is from a scenic spot, very famous one in Anhui province. The point I'm trying to make, because this scenic spot decides to announce that they're going to offer free admission to all the locals, and this is the kind of the result. what I'm trying to say is that the recovery is real and it's on the way already. And if we compare the Qingming Festival, which is April the 4th, to the latest development, which Labor Day from May the 5th, May the 1st to 5th, we have seen that the Chinese domestic tourism actually has got some recovery. And you can see that in the comparing to 2019, the Labor Day festival, actually China suffered a 70% loss in the revenue, but comparing to Qingming Festival, which they suffer about 80%, you can see there is some kind of a warm-up signals. And the prediction of the recovery pattern is, I guess it's kind of kind of similar to other countries as well. People will start from local and the suburban areas, neighboring cities, and then they will do cross-provincial so-called long-haul domestic travel until they do outbound travel. And also from a demographic perspective, we will see that the group under the age of 30 actually are more active and in a way more receptive to the idea of traveling than people who are more more senior. So some of the major observations that we can make. One thing is that definitely that we see some optimism among the Chinese consumers. That generally speaking, that the Chinese consumers, they all understand the severity of this pandemic, that's without any doubt. But we have seen that about 2/3 of the Chinese consumers remain optimistic about the second half of 2020. And some of them even indicate that they would increase their future spending. And if we look at the travel and tourism sectors, this is the domestic arrivals year to date. You can see that there is a slow recovery pattern since late February. Similar pattern can be seen from the hotel data. This is from STR, that's the May festival, the Labor Day festival. You can see that the average hotel occupancy rate actually reached almost 50%. And the writing on the wall is very clear, it's a localism, that the Chinese tourists are actually staying local, staying domestic to destinations. We have seen, when multiple surveys ask Chinese tourists about their future, once the pandemic is over, once the lockdown is lifted, when and how they want to travel. And we can see there will be small waves of travel after the pandemic. And indeed, there is one study on the right side. I know you cannot read it, but basically this survey actually conducted among the Chinese tourists about their intention to travel either domestic or outbound last November. Coincidentally, they did that. And then they did that follow-up survey earlier this year. And with a very clear pattern that the Chinese tourists prefer to stay in domestic destinations. So you can see that last year, November 2019, that about 36% of the Chinese consumers indicate they're interested in outbound travel. But for earlier this year, it's declined to 23%. And if we look at their destination choice, of course, they prefer the domestic destinations, but even if they travel abroad, most of them prefer to stay in Asia. And if we look at the hotel data, this pattern is even clearer. About nearly 90% of the hotels in China are already reopened. And one thing very interesting is that you can see that comparing to those hotels in business centers, those city centers, those suburban hotels actually are doing much better in the recovery, during this recovery. And also the mid-scale and economy hotels are actually doing better, partly because they're more flexible in their pricing strategy. And we have definitely seen some major changes of consumer preference And many Chinese tourists indicate that this whole pandemic is a transformative experience for them to think about life, think about their own travel, think about their family. So we will most likely see there are kind of polarized different preference among the Chinese tourists. Some of them are interested in even more interested in hedonic consumptions, that they want to travel more, they want to explore more because their life is short. And on the other hand, a lot of people are being very cautious, they want to stay home. And also, as a result, we see that family tour, health and wellness tour, and nature tourism has has drawn more popularity. And a lot more Chinese travelers indicated that they want to buy insurance next time when they travel. And to wrap up, for the Chinese, part of the Chinese recovery pattern is focusing on what they call the supply side structure reform, meaning that on one hand that this of course this pandemic is a huge crisis. On the other hand, the Chinese tourism industry has seen this as an opportunity for them to conduct some major fundamental structural reform for the hotel, for the travel industry. So what we have seen is that the industry has been trying very hard to upgrade the cleanliness and hygiene and health standard, and they have been more willing to incorporate new technology and new innovation. They have been very creative in coming up with different value-added packages to the consumers. And the local governments, particularly at the city level, have been very proactive in terms of stimulating the economy, particularly in the tourism sector related sectors. That during the Labor Day festival between May 1st and to the 5th, we have seen at least 68 cities try to issue some kind of tourism consumption vouchers that the locals can use to on different tourism related business. And another thing that is very, very interesting, I haven't seen that in other parts of the world, is this idea of live streaming, which is, in my view, is a kind of a more advanced idea of virtual tourism, that a lot of destinations, a lot of OTAs are being very proactive in engaging live streaming. So for example, on your left, you can see this smiley gentleman. This is the CEO of Ctrip. And James Liang, he himself was personally involved in directly doing this live stream sales of several destinations, which actually was very positively reacted by the government, by the consumers. In the middle, you can see this is one of an OTA's new efforts in terms of live stream broadcasting how hotels are cleaning, so that they want to assure the consumers that there will be very strict procedures being conducted to make sure that the hotels are hygiene and clean. With this, I'm going to wrap up and return the floor to Dr. Wu. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all four panelists for such an informative session. As informed earlier in the chat box function to all our attendees, given such an exciting topic, today's forum will probably go longer than scheduled, and we hope that you can stay tuned for our upcoming discussions. So the very first set of discussion questions around for our panelists to consider is, moving forward, we definitely need to think about what does the current disruption mean in terms of market shifts, consumer changes of expectations, and what should destinations do to cope with the upcoming changes. And some of the questions that were raised by our attendees were, for example, do you foresee people prefer different types of destinations? Maybe a shift between nature/remote type of destinations, or metropolitan versus resorts type of travel destinations? And also, what should destinations do to manage travelers' expectations in later 2020, or maybe even into 2021? Would you like to share your observations and understanding in your respective regions? Perhaps we'll begin with Michelle.
Thank you, Lori. This is a very good question, and it's one that we are actively trying to find some answers. We're still, relatively early in terms of trying to find answers to such questions. I think Robert, very interesting presentation where he did talk about some of those shifts that are already happening in China, which are much further along than we are. What we know is, or at least what we suspect is that consumers will be looking for different practices that are related to health and safety, and that will provide some security to them as they move forward. We don't expect them to go into very crowded places. Things will start local, and I think we can expect people to start exploring maybe a little bit further afield within their own countries, or within Canada in our case. I'm not sure remote, because there's a different definition of what remote is. Particularly here in British Columbia, it could be in the middle of a mountain somewhere. But there's definitely different areas that are perhaps more common knowledge for local people that they'll go to first and foremost, whether it's in provincial park or national park or other areas. One of the things that we'll have to deal with also is that, like, as I mentioned in my presentation, Canadians are very fond of traveling internationally, and our travel agencies tend to be very well versed into destinations that exist abroad. And it's not so clear that they will be as versed in terms of destinations that exist in Canada that will potentially become maybe a little bit more sought after. So this is something that we'll have to turn our attention to, is to provide them the tools to understand better what opportunities exist, and create that linkage between the operators, tourism operators across the country, and and those agencies. It's a huge opportunity for us to also start, maybe working toward developing new destinations in Canada that would set us up for future success when international destinations reopen. And that is something that we had actively looked at before in terms of developing different regions, opening opportunities for tourism, and that might actually accelerate. Well, it could be an opportunity here to get some advancement in this. So I think that's one thing. One big issue in the short run, in order to kickstart the tourism, will be to make sure that we are, and our industry are equipped with the knowledge of what expectations, what needs are that people will be looking for when they go traveling, in terms of sanitations, in terms of the type of services, and what I think is going to be super interesting is to see how that's going to lead to some innovations. I remember saying yesterday, as a restaurant in Amsterdam, I believe, that is open on a dock with little cabins that put two peoples together inside a glass, a little bit of a glass cabin that looks a little bit like a mini greenhouse type thing. So I thought that was super interesting because of the innovation of trying to get their business back and find a different way also differentiating themselves. So I think when we talk about sustainability, that's something that will be front and center. I think, and people will help toward that goal. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Michelle. How about Olivia? What would you like to share with our attendees today based on what is going on right now in Europe? Thank you.
Yeah, analyzing the shift of demand is a bit of probably too soon, because as you ask people about traveling internationally, there are in Europe about 7 out of 10 saying that in their mind it's a bit too soon for them to consider traveling internationally, because it's still like it's not the panic anymore, but it's and they still don't know where they can travel. So you can still ask the question about what the dream they want for the next travel, but it has to be very carefully considered, because it's still a bit of a short-term vision. But when we look at some of the trends from the multiple surveys here we conduct in Europe, we still see a very tangible appetite for traveling, for sure. Of course, more kind of regionally or domestically, but regionally, so within Europe, so not particularly in your own, the whole myth about rediscovering the very nice landscape just around you is just a myth. I mean, people will want to continue to discover and to explore the countries and the places they don't know. So space will be before seeing people going easily for a long haul travel, especially in Asia from the Europe prospect, is going to take a bit of time. So yes, of course, domestic, regional, and long haul, that will be the sequence probably. I don't really buy the idea that people are going to choose different types of wishes in terms of more rural or mountain for two reasons. The first is I don't buy from the data we have that people are completely going to change what they want when they travel. Basically, they will change the requirements and that will act a lot in their decision-making process about the destination, able to comfort them in terms of trust for the way to deal with the visitor experience. But in terms of basic motivational and basic needs, there is no reason why they should suddenly become big fans of spa wellness, whereas they were outdoor travelers in the past. So in terms of space, the thing is, we've seen from the sentiment analysis that people understand that the risk can be everywhere, in a small city, in a large city, in a cruise, in a ski resort, in a tiny whatever destination. So it has nothing to do with the space. There is some growing sentiment here that maybe people will go to the summer in the mountains because it's fresh air and maybe the virus will be there. I don't buy it. I think there might be some shift, but at the end of the day, there are also many people who are just starving for going back to Disneyland, whereas Disneyland is a full, it's kind of if you think it could be maybe risky for some, but still the intention to travel again at Disneyland is very high. Same for city breaks. So it's the space with a few exceptions like cruise, which probably would take a bit more time to fully recover some sort of attractiveness, because they were so much under negative reputation. But for all the rest, I don't think people will change their mind. And when we look at the positiveness that has been totally restored and even not so much impact in terms of cultural attractions or leisure and outdoor, again, there is no reason people will change their mind. And particularly what we can safely say that people will still want to go soon for cultural attractions, some of the big iconic attractions. And of course, probably the outdoor is going to be a bit higher on the agenda. It's easy because, okay, you feel a bit less, packed, but I think the motivation will not change. The choice of destination will change, assuming the key question about, am I going to be safe? What do they put in place at all steps of my visit to reassure that I'm going to be treated like in the best conditions? And we understand that people are going gradually, years after years, to get used to be checked their temperature as long as they are going to. They were very soon after Charlie, after 9/11. They were now, and they have the habit, and they are okay to be checked for pure safety. That will come, in just like as normal. But the first experience will be extremely, extremely important. So basically, we don't really buy that it's going to be a completely new shift of demand. I don't think so. It's going to be a completely new choice of destinations depending on what they can offer and the conditions for visiting. But the role and the routes for traveling are still there. We don't feel any sharp decline about travel. People will not travel if they cannot afford to travel. But for those who can, they will still, and they will do what they always want to do.
Thank you, Olivia, for sharing your insights and your thoughts on the topic. So moving forward, definitely some things will stay, something will change, given all the disruptions that are going on right now. So there is also a conversation going on regarding reflecting upon current practices and advocating for changes happening for the future. So with that topics going on, I would like to ask another question on behalf of the audience for our panelists. What is the one change that you would like to see or advocate for to happen in our industry or in our research or in our practices? And that's a general question that's open to all. And perhaps we'll begin with Dave.
Yeah, thank you for the question. You know, I think the one thing to keep in mind is that we're in the early stages of the impact of this virus on the U.S. economy. Tourism Economics is currently estimating, and they estimate this on a weekly basis, that the impacts on travel spending in the United States domestically is that it's down approximately 90% compared to the year earlier. And I think that we're going to see that eventually this impact is going to spread to all other parts of the economy. Where right now, like the current estimate by the Atlanta Fed is that the GDP, U.S. GDP in the second quarter could decline. Right now, the estimate is it could decline as much as 37% at an annual rate. But it kind of leaves me thinking about the last downturn that we experienced that was really travel related was back in 2001. And after the U.S. economy went through a recession, the post 9/11 downturn that impacted the travel industry set in motion what representatives of the travel industry determined the lost decade, where the U.S. lost a considerable share of long-haul travel. And that eventually led to policy changes in the United States that led to the Travel Promotion Act, that then led eventually to Brand USA, which then led to a marketing arm for the United States, and that, with some other circumstances, actually enabled the United States to regain a significant share of long-haul travel over a 7 to 8 year period. And so I think that it would be wise, I think, and I think U.S. travel policymakers right now are looking at the current downturn in travel, which is devastating for the industry. But looking at they're probably looking at what investments should be made in areas that make the industry more competitive in the long run, and it could be in infrastructure, et cetera. So I think that's one change you're probably going to see. There may not be another Travel Promotion Act coming out of this, but because that may not be the issue that has to be dealt with. But there definitely is going to be an opportunity to invest in some of the areas that can make travel to the United States more competitive.
Thank you, Dave. Robert, what do you think on the matter? What is some of the changes that you would like to advocate for or you would like to see? Thank you.
Well, thank you. I agree with Dave that like any other crisis, if we respond and cope with the crisis appropriately, indeed, a crisis can be converted, can be used as a new opportunity. It can bring new opportunities for us, and it can create new opportunities for the industry. It can create new opportunities for the consumers. In this sense, I would say that innovation is something that I would really love to advocate for. That I think that the tourism industry has been traditionally being considered as a very, very vulnerable industry. Well, I would like to use the word probably we are a little bit more sensitive than other industry sectors. But whether we are vulnerable or not, well, it depends on how well we can adopt different strategies and technologies and deal with different crises like this one. The people, as the most frequently used adjective for this pandemic is unprecedented. It created unprecedented challenges to the tourism industry, but hopefully it will also push us to think about what can be, what we can come up with, creative ideas innovative technologies, new strategies, and what are some of the fundamentally challenging aspects of the tourism industry that we haven't been able to address. For example, the infrastructure issue, the technology adoption. How can we better use new technology to ensure the destinations and the services clean, hygiene, and secure? So there are many different things that we can do after, and we, this pandemic is indeed an opportunity for us to reflect upon that and think about what are some of the priorities that we should invest our resources to. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Michelle, what about your thoughts on the matter? What are some of the changes or translational research opportunities that you think might benefit our industry moving forward? Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. I agree with everything that's been said with regard to infrastructure and innovations, and I think these are key things. One of the things that that keeps coming up also with this particular crisis is that it might not be the last one that we're going to see. We hope that it will be, but we have to be prepared for some other ones like this. So there's a whole question of industry resiliency that comes to the forefront for us, and how do we make sure that we build an industry that is as resilient and can navigate through things of that nature with greater ease if it's at all possible. So one of the things that we're going to be focusing, of course, is turning our attention to domestic tourism. Destination Canada, we're known for doing promotion internationally. That's going to be turning domestic. And I think the opportunity there is twofold. One is as we create more awareness and demands going forward, is to create opportunities for investment, which is going to be required if we're to maintain or build some new infrastructure. It's something we have to be a little worried about, is we have all those assets right now that for the foreseeable future, we don't know how long, hopefully not too long, will be under invested or will be suffering in terms of investment. So how do we spur investment of that nature? And I think innovation, like Robert mentions, is going to be a key thing here that we might see coming at the forefront relatively quickly, particularly with the new needs that travelers are going to be requiring in order to have the trust to go to different places, whether it's urban or it's in the rural areas. So those innovations also could take care of a number of issues that have plagued us here in Canada, and I think other places around the world. For instance, labor shortage is a big thing. So some level of automation for some tasks might actually alleviate some of those pressures that happen from time to time whenever you have things that becomes really popular, and also just the opportunity to develop as we develop new experiences, perhaps make sure that the sustainability is at the forefront of that. So I think these are opportunities. Really, it's all about making the industry and the sector that much more resilient. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Michelle. Olivia, given your expertise in analytics as well as digital research, what are your thoughts regarding the future changes and something that you would like to advocate for? Thank you.
Well, of course, I'm not DMO, so I'm just reflecting on what we see among the DMOs here in Europe. And well, I don't know if it's exactly aligned with your question, but what we see is there's another resurgence of shifting in terms of organizations from a pure promotional role into a more management role, and so we see again that this destination management issue is right on the table. There are many DMOs who didn't really did that, and they are now dealing with a lot of stakeholders, new friends from sanitary authorities and public transportations, and they are doing a lot of task forces. And the next step probably for them will be to keep that role, because again, people are, I mean, the people are choosing destination a bit for advertising, it's a 7% in average, but it's 40% based on experiences. And so destinations need to get back control on their reputation from the experience. And so this shift probably we assume is going to be anchored in the role of many DMOs in Europe, while they are learning very fast through, unfortunately, through the crisis. Then for the rest, the feeling here is that at the end of the day, there's very little to do, because it's first of all a sanitary problem. If there's no virus, there's no problem. So it's the focus is more about how to communicate in a smart way, because we're feeling that there's a lot of mistrust against officials. As you've seen, there's how many billions of data which are shared, and even in Europe, nobody has the same way of counting death from cases of the COVID-19. And so the question about do we trust what is said by officials, and somehow tourism offices can be seen sometimes as officials, is a key point. So the question about communication in not only in crisis but for restoring again the trust is another area where we're seeing a lot of shifts. So again, if we had to do some sort of advocacy or kind of giving or sharing some advice, it's really adding the AM to the DMO. Again, it already was the case before, and it's more than ever the case, because COVID-19 is not a nice thing to communicate on, but it's a nice thing it's a necessary thing to manage as a destination.
Thank you, Olivia. Time really went by very quickly. Thank you to our four remarkable panelists for such a great conversation today. And I'm pretty sure that we would have more to share if the time permits. Today's online forum is co-organized by TTRA and Temple University's US Asia Center for Tourism and Hospitality Research. Should you have any questions or the audience, please stay tuned and also reach out to the two organizations here for any questions or any requests or anything that you would like to discuss with us. Also, just a friendly reminder, please remember to join us at the 2020 Marketing Outlook Forum to be hosted in Bethesda, Maryland in October 5th to the 7th. Thank you once again for attending. We went over time, but you stayed here and joining us for such an exciting conversation anyways. And thank you all very much. And with that said, that goes to the end of today's online forum. Thank you and have a good one.
Thank you very much. Merci.
Bye bye.
Au revoir.
À bientôt. Ciao.